Well, I'd like to outline a bunch of problems. The problem that we raised last week was the relation between images and text. But we can certainly add to that list very quickly. The reflexivity that it takes, or the distance it takes to see yourself caught up in all the rituals of your life can be very difficult. In fact, many people say there are no rituals in my life, when indeed their lives are literally defined by their rituals. A straightforward definition of culture by the anthropologist is that group defined by the beliefs and actions and values that it holds in common. And what makes those values and beliefs visible anyway are rituals of one sort or another. So what video, what television can do, you remember the 4 definitions of understanding that we reviewed last week very quickly inside understanding of one's own culture, may or may not entail knowledge about one's own rituals, because knowledge could be at a behavioral level where you're just acting, quote, naturally. Well, it isn't natural at all. It's culture bound. And yet it's so natural to you that you don't get to the second level of seeing it as differentiated from the other person, the other group, the other culture. So the big problem that we have in living traditions is how to get at that reflexive level. Sometimes it's not easy. The most difficult thing is to get the second kind of understanding, how others see us, to become self-conscious of the rituals that we indeed engage in every day of our lives. Television can degenerate quickly into entertainment, which is where it is in this country. It can't be more than superficial, otherwise it would miss its function there as entertainment. It can't really cause difficulties or make one self-conscious, otherwise it would fail as entertainment. So here's where images, as I said last week, can conceal as much as show us things. And maybe the biggest ritual that we don't even see as a ritual is mass media. Television itself structures our daily lives. My kids right now, let's see, what are they watching? Well, let's see, today's Wednesday. I don't know what they're watching. I never get home before 8:30 on Wednesdays. But here is a pervasive ritual in this country that literally structures families, lives, dates. When you schedule things really out of your control. It depends on what shows are on and whether anyone wants to call someone on the telephone. Now, if you call at the wrong time, nobody answers. Well, what are they doing? And if you know the book Unobtrusive Measures, you should know it because it's a book of strategies that researchers have devised in order to get unobtrusively at what people do to deal with the problem of the Hawthorne effect. That is, if people know you're studying them, they act differently than if not. The Hawthorne effect is well known in social research. Well, unobtrusive measures was the attempt to come at the problem or avoid the problem. That is, if people don't know they're being studied, then they won't act other than the way they would act ordinarily. One of the unobtrusive measures, and I was at Stanford when they were writing their book, and I was in their research seminar, was that they charted. I'll give you two quick ones to show how it worked. One, the Science Museum in Chicago wanted to know how to invest their money in the displays. Well, how would they find out what is the most effective feature that in over a 12-month period? You know, where should they invest their money? What kinds of displays were popular? And they thought, well, we could ask people questionnaires. A lot of different ideas occurred to them. But the one that they hit on was very effective. They kept track of the tile replacements in the floor. Like the whole museum is tile. And, of course, the wear of the tiles occurred where the biggest crowds went. And over a year's time, what they did was record where they replaced the tiles. And they had a very accurate measure, very accurate, very precise measure of where, what was the most popular. Now that would be an example of unobtrusive measurements. Whereas if you ask people what was, they would project something may not really be very accurate for whatever reason. The other experiment I remember was really showed how TV structured our lives. They took, every city has water mains and pressure. I guess there's gauges that shows the water pressure goes down below to a certain point, and high-rise apartments don't get any water at the top, for example. So they, in 6 cities, they measured very accurate gauges on the water pressure. And they were mystified at how it went because it was very erratic. But pretty soon they could predict when the water level would go down. And it turned out to be every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes. And what was that?
Commercials?
It's a commercial break. Everyone went to the bathroom. So everyone flushed the toilet at the same time, and so New York City, the meter went. But the book is really a brilliant book on how to get at what people do. The problem for the course is to research a living tradition, and if you're in that tradition, how do you do it? Where you don't even see the ritual, you think it's natural. Well, of course, my definition of the art follows. Art is artifice. Art is ability to transcend a time and place and literally make of it a ritual which reinforces the values and beliefs of the group, which is what I think art is. The elaboration of putting art in a frame or on a pedestal, that exists in the West in high art. But it is an aberration after all that art is really the structure of beliefs that get reinforced through rituals and sometimes the objectification of a value in the form of an artifact. But even an artifact typically is not valued for itself. And you're all familiar with the Rockefeller wing at the Metropolitan, where even some of those totems, they're presented as if they were made for eternity, when we know very well that they were strictly constructed for the occasion, the event, and then they were discarded. They had no intrinsic value at all. But given their treatment in the West, which is to formally make of them an aesthetic object with some kind of transcendental value, is precisely to distort the meaning. Well, when I say distort meaning, I would say that that's a false understanding. That's one of the 4 kinds of understanding. That is, we can have a formal understanding of, quote, primitives, where we absorb the images and what we see, behaviors into our categories. They could be sociological, religious, political, and so on. That is definitely understanding. That's not a false understanding. But my point last week was it is distinctive and shouldn't be confused with the other kinds of understandings. Now, many of you will be in a ritual called the oral exam. And it needn't be painful at all. It could be a celebration if you catch all the players up in the ritual. And you and your advisor should orchestrate that ritual to a successful conclusion. It's a celebration of an achievement of research. With this group, it's researching art. So even the very rituals that are underway here, this seminar, for 2 hours, it's an arbitrary time and place, Wednesdays, 6 days, and nothing, but that's a sacred hour. I mean, we have to show up here and think about our research projects. Well, our research projects themselves are rituals. They will come by rewards from this institution. It's called a PH.D. And if you pass the oral exam, there's a secret initiation, which I shouldn't mention, but it's not too painful, actually. Some people faint when they see the blood. Well, I really shouldn't
Boiling blood?
For you novices, I really shouldn't say too much about the rituals that come up a little later. In any event, we saw, I think, a fascinating video. And of course, very much in touch with weapons and their healing and their various rituals. And I guess I'm saying that I don't see, I guess the only question for each of us is which rituals are we going to invest our energy in? Very basic question. Very basic question. Len and I go way back. Too far to mention. But,
we were colleagues together in Columbus, Ohio, at Ohio State
in
University.
the School of Art. And we had Alan Cathro one year, and I made a long interview with Alan, which appeared in a series of publications. But way back then, Alan and I think I still have the tapes where Alan was talking about little paper boats in the gutter. He worked this rituals out with his children, actually. They put paper boats in the gutter, and then they would watch them go down to the sewer. One article I remember, it was called "Happenings in and Out of School." We had a lot of fun doing that. So I think Alan was really one of the first, if not the first, very visible person
Who did happenings.
who started something called Happenings.
And I was the first person on the planet Earth to have to explain them. Because at that time I was writing for the Village Voice.
That's right, you were writing for the Voice.
And someone said, what are these things called happenings that your friends are doing? So I said, well, I'll write them up. But I didn't know that no one had ever written them up. Now, I mean, Capra had already a thesis, I believe. He was, if not the first, one of the first. Red Rooms was also one of the first.
Yeah.
And the first happenings may have taken place in Provincetown, Massachusetts, on the tip of Cape Cod.
I think so.
And I saw one of them by Red Rooms, and what it was, he advertised that he was going to do a play called Fire. And he had all these pretty English girls, I don't know where they came from, running through Provincetown handing out flyers. And when you showed up at this gallery, which was right by the water, at sunset, there was Red Rooms with his bright orange hair doing a painting of firemen putting out a fire. And so the happening was the act of the artist doing the painting. And a lot of people felt cheated and they were bullied. They said, this isn't a play, this is just you wanting to get attention by having people watch you while you paint. And there was people were very confused and upset. Why did he do it? Or the larger question became, why are painters and sculptors and other visual artists suddenly doing these kind of short plays?
Well, the amazing thing was, and it's still amazing, that the energy, the ideas came from painters. It didn't come from theater people.
Right.
That was the amazing thing. These were painters.
It was a desire to get off the canvas.
Well, now, it was a desire, now we're getting to a level of explanation. And I would make a distinction in your own research thinking between the attempt to explain something, that is, get some causal relationship between not only how it came about, but why, looking for causal factors. That kind of research I'm just not very interested in, although you could do the sociology of art, you could do the psychology of art, and that would be a kind of explanatory research. My interest, as some of you know, is really a descriptive and interpretive rather than analytic. I'm not very interested in analysis of any kind. And my reason is that if you take the model of the artist-researcher, it is really not very important to have explanations. What's important is to maintain the continuity of life through ritual. That's what art does, I think. But this means to reiterate, to do it again. You don't do it once, you do it again. And the structure of your life is literally the reinforcement of daily rituals and routines, which is the only place you're going to find any meaning. There is no meaning outside of that lived experience. Explanation is then in the university setting to be a cop-out. In other words, it displaces the focus on meanings and sidetracks your attention over to causes and explanations, which undoubtedly is a comfort to many people, and maybe that's needed too. But the model of research that we've talked about so far, the artist-researcher, and the question of, well, how does one do that? Well, one engages in the activity. One doesn't just look at it as a spectator. Now, there's a whole bunch of problems here. One, how can you tell between a living and a dead ritual, or a fossilized one? And if it's fossilized, is it worth resuscitating? And if it's living, is it worth maintaining it? And this dilemma is the problem of living your life. And you can't look it up in the back of the book. Each day you have to work it out. Now, is that good or bad? Well, that's the dilemma. And it can be terrible and scary and frightening. And yet, there it is. Now, I want to be very careful. I'm not trying to rank order those understandings. I mean, by that I mean just a text, just a way of identifying, I think, quite different kinds of understanding in the arts. The other two are much more difficult. That is, an inside understanding of another culture is, for me, the biggest challenge. Or even whether that's possible, I don't know. It may or may not be possible, but it is intelligible. That is, you can imagine that. And then, I've already mentioned outsiders' understanding of your own culture. That is, seeing yourself as others see you. For many, it would be the first time they see that they're engaged in these rituals. They're not natural at all. But I think artists can be sorted out on the dimension of their self-consciousness. That is, there are artists who are completely unself-conscious, but of course they don't know they're artists. To see yourself as an artist is a reflexive act where you see that you have a part to play that distinguishes you from others. In some tribal situations, there is not that distinction. There is no word for art, and it would be, there's no differentiation of role. But in some society, complex societies where there's role differentiation, then as in the Vedic tradition with caste system, it's very prescribed roles that have been accepted by members of the society. And this is hard to understand. Westerners have a hard job with this. I'll give you just one We have something called first person, second person, third person in our Western grammar. So does Sanskrit has the same distinction, first, second, and third, as it turns out. But our first person is I am, right? I am. Then the second person would be you are, and then he, she, and then they would be the third person. In Sanskrit grammar, it's reversed. The first person is they. Now, just if you think about that, it shows the egocentricity of our whole culture. And I mention that because Sandro uses that device. What do you call it?
The artist in the first person and the artist in the third person, where the second is the
I guess that's what he started with tonight. And as soon as he said it, I thought, well, in the Vedic tradition, the most important is the community, not the individual. And even the grammar is organized. First, second, and third person. And it's just the reverse of our grammar. There's a lot of other interesting contrast grammatically, but then what's the relation between grammar and the culture? Everything. The grammar is the culture. It structures thought, and there are thoughts that can be thought in Sanskrit that cannot be thought in English. It's as simple as that. We're even losing some of the grammar we had, like the subjunctive is where we're losing the subjunctive. Would that I had, or if I were king. You don't hear that construction. We're losing the subjunctive. Interesting. Now what does that mean? It means the whole imaginative way of thinking. The subjunctive is the grammatical way of thinking. In logic, the category is called contrary to fact, conditional thinking. That is, if I had won the bet yesterday, and then you continue to explore that in your imagination, in order to explore it in your imagination, there has to be the grammatical form there, which is contrary to fact. The fact is you did not win the bet. So if you only had past, present, and future, that case, you could not engage imaginatively in thinking. If you had one, you would have. You see that would be denied you. You literally could not think in that category. So logicians are exploring that. It's called modal logic, if you're interested. Modal logic is the kind of reasoning that can occur temporally in different modalities, temporal modalities. I've given you one, contrary to fact. So if your colleague says, hey, wait a minute, you can't think that way because it didn't happen. Now, the mistake there is you're prescribing, well, notice the restrictions placed on what the person is saying you can and cannot do. Now, morality and art are very closely connected here because if you think about it, you cannot have a morality unless you can imagine evil. You can't have an ethics unless you can imagine yourself doing other than what you do. In other words, you can not only make a mistake, but you can commit evil. That is, it must be, and therefore it must be possible for you to do other than what you're doing, to do wrong, to do evil. But this is grammatical too. Do you see the whole structure of it is grammatical? Let me give you an example in English where you, as soon as you hear it, you know there's something wrong with it. And let me take a third grade now. The teacher says, I punished Billy severely, even though he could not have done otherwise. Now what's odd about that? Reward and punishment has to assume what? That there's alternatives. That is, and morality depends upon the idea that you have a clear choice. And you have some notion of good and bad. You did bad. so you should be punished. Now that's a very simple binary analysis, but the fact, phenomenologically, is that it's a much more complex situation, even in the most simple situation. But my point is that our grammar literally structures the phenomenology of our lives. So that to study your grammar is to study your options, your choices. What's that got to do with art? Everything. Art is the supreme investigation of your choices. So you don't know the grammar of the choices or the logic of the choices. You don't see how far you can go without being punished. And you will be punished. Why? Because people and groups differ with regard to their appreciation of the limits of their grammar. And when you see too many possibilities, you get nervous. People get nervous. So another function of society is regulation and control. Not only to allow freedom, but to control it. And each society differs with regard to that. That too. So you have to decide in your research paper, what it is you want to explore. And I've got all the papers that you gave me last week. I haven't written much on them, but I've read them all, so I know where you are. And that's why I can now ask you to think about the kind of understanding you're seeking, and how to document it, and how to share it with this community. How are you going to share it? Well, one way, words and images are the two ways you have. But we also going to investigate some music, I think. Where's the beautiful paper? I want to show. Can I pass that around? Beautiful. What he did was take let me pass it around if I can find it. Aristides has a nice paper, but you have to read it. I can't. It's in a narrative form.
Is it finished yet?
Audrey did. That was a very interesting paper. Okay, so there. Thought I had it. Better be right. Oh, here it is. Epigraphs, why don't you say it in your own words. Tell them what you're doing here in these columns. Here's Cypriot, here's modern Greek, and here's the translation. What he's interested in doing is, as he said, I think last week, he's interested in developing songs that are cast in the meter of contemporary Cypriot dialect, which is related but not at all the same as modern Greek, especially when you get away from the cities, as I understand it. And here's the form of his research. You see, he's taking the standard feet, and he's taking Cypriot, and he's
basically Cypriot dialect. It's quite far away from modern Greek, even the everyday spoken, the cafe language, the street language. Greek, modern Greek from Cypriot dialect, it's very different. When we speak in Cyprus, Greek people from mainland tourists, they maybe understand 30 or 40, sometimes 50% of what we talk. And we understand everything because we go to school and our official language is modern Greek. So when they talk, we get anything they say, but they don't. And there is a lot of literature in Cypriot dialect which is not taught, and composers.
Is it an oral tradition then?
Yeah, it's an oral tradition. People in their homes, in the streets, they practice that language. And lately it's getting really lost, especially in the cities where our TV and radio, for example, they use
Structures.
It's in modern Greek. So. But our village people still they talk the very heavy Cypriot dialect language in the villages and shepherds. My parents, they talk really different from the way I talk. So I'm interested in finding out if there is a difference in the rhythmic structure of the music resulting from the language itself. And I want to say, if I pursue that clearly, that in Cyprus we are losing our rhythm structure because we are using the modern Greek language, and composers not anymore compose Cypriot.
And of course, poetry is precisely the grammar. In this case, he's taken the spondee, the standard analyses of the foot. What is that? The spondee, the trochaic,
iambic, trochaic, spondaic, donia.
So that is the beat or the measure of language, and of course each language is different, and that in itself lays out the possibilities that he studied. That is, he's going to compose with his friends music grounded not in modern Greek, but Cypriot. I think it's a tremendously exciting project. Well, we're out of time.